Let's get more on the race for the White House. To do that, right here, I'm going to bring in Green Party presidential candidate Dr. Jill Stein. And with a thank you for being here. I appreciate your time in this heat, which you're weathering very well.
My pleasure.
Let's talk about the national polls, in which last check you were hovering at about 3 or 4% in the polls. So ultimately, what is your role in this election? Do you really believe that you will be occupying the desk in the Oval Office at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue next January?
Well, shall we say, given the revelations in the WikiLeaks trove of emails, there are a lot of people who really question now supporting this party, which essentially sabotaged Bernie Sanders' campaign. So many of Sanders' supporters are now looking for another place to go. And I would again issue my invitation to Senator Sanders and urge him to consider withdrawing his endorsement for Hillary Clinton, given these revelations of how the DNC actually sabotaged his campaign.
All right, but honestly, you look to be in the White House, or is there another goal? Is there a message goal that you would be satisfied with come November if you see that that is something that you have contributed to significantly?
I would frame that question in terms of, for example, a generation of millennials who've been locked out of jobs, who've been locked out of homes, who've been locked out of a climate future, and who can't get out of debt. Are they just trying to make a statement? My campaign is the one place that will actually cancel student debt. Like we did for the crooks on Wall Street, we can use the same tool of quantitative easing to cancel student debt. And the point I'm making here is that if that word gets out, there are 42 million people who have no place to go except into my campaign. That's actually a winning plurality of the vote. So it's just not true that we don't have a chance. In fact, if democracy prevails and there's a real debate, we do have a realistic possibility.
You mentioned debates. That plus the fact that you're only on the ballot right now in 23 states. You must, to get those numbers of millions of voters, be on the ballot in all 50. What is the likelihood of that happening and getting into the debates?
We expect to be on the ballot in just about all states. In the last race, I was on the ballot for 85% of voters. This time we expect to be on for at least 95 and perhaps 98 or 99% of voters. So the votes are there, and you know, look at where the American public is. The public is clamoring for something else. We came up from 2% in the polls about 6 weeks ago to what's now as high as 6 and even 7% in the most recent CNN poll. So we tripled our numbers prior to having any major media coverage whatsoever, because people are desperate for someone who's not Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton.
And there may be that, but to what do you attribute that? Are those Sanders supporters, you think, that are coming your way?
We know Sanders supporters, in fact, are pouring into our campaign, but also everyday people, and especially millennials and students who basically don't have a future under the current system, are really beginning to get the word out, knowing that if they come out, they can actually take over this election and win it, not only to cancel debt, to make public higher education free, to create an emergency jobs program that will address this emergency of climate change that we're feeling today, and to create a foreign policy based on international law and human rights instead of this catastrophic regime change foreign policy that we've been involved in.
Earlier this week, radio host Dan Savage had this to say. I'm going to read the quote. You are essentially, if you're voting for Jill Stein, helping to potentially elect Donald J. Trump president of these United States, which would be a catastrophe. How do you respond to that? Do you feel at all a sense of responsibility that your role may be indeed ultimately be that of spoiler in the race?
So, two things. One, I would feel terrible if Donald Trump gets elected, but I would also feel terrible if Hillary Clinton gets elected, because Trump says horrific things. Hillary Clinton actually has a track record of horrific wars and regime change, of promoting the risk of nuclear war, in fact, over Syria, where she wants to start an air war with a no-fly zone with a nuclear-armed power. She's spread fracking around the world and helped contribute to this climate crisis. In my view, the most horrible thing of all is a voting system that says we have two deadly choices. In fact, we do have the ability to stand up, and in order to stand up to Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton can't do it. In order to defeat proto-fascism or neo-fascism, this right-wing extremism, the only way to defeat that, as we know from history and from the current moment, you have to stand up with true progressive policies. If we've tripled our vote, we can double it and get into the debates. I urge people to support my campaign so that we can have a strong voice to stand up to Donald Trump, his militarism, his racism, his xenophobia.
A strong voice, that being yours, certainly very much. Dr. Jill Stein, thank you very much.
Great being with you, Alan.
Thank you. Two takes on that email controversy.